superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. Today, our outlook on the midterm elections and the appointment of Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court with our guest from Los Angeles, attorney Eddie Tabish. Ed Golly with Jim Peterson, Joe Reinhardt in the Tan Talk studio, where you can offer up your opinion on the program today by picking up the phone and calling 441-3000. We'd love to hear from you. Eddie Tabish is a constitutional lawyer from Los Angeles. He is chair of the board of directors of the Center for Inquiry, and we'll ask him to tell us a little bit more about that when we get to our half-hour break. Eddie has filed amicus briefs arguing for the preservation of the separation of state and church with the United States Supreme Court and the California Supreme Court. Eddie, you didn't feel anything from the earthquake in Alaska, did you?
Nothing at all.
Okay, good. Let's start out with Kavanaugh, tell us what you would like to about his appointment to the court and the effects that you think it will have.
The most dangerous aspect of it is he will be the fifth vote for the first time ever for the Supreme Court to have a majority that will say no branch of government can favor belief over non-belief. It's always been that way. No branch of government can favor belief over non-belief. Now there are 5 votes to reverse that and say government can favor religion over irreligion. That, by very definition, constitutes second-class citizenship for atheists. It is the worst possible result, and we have no idea of the types of religion-promoting legislation that the state legislatures will come up with, and that the Supreme Court will now uphold. So we are truly looking at some form of theocracy and second-class citizenship for non-believers. Also, from the standpoint of church-state separation and stopping religious right-wing federal judges at all levels, including the Supreme Court, from being confirmed. With all of that on the line, the elections were a net loss to us because the House of Representatives is irrelevant to stopping religious right-wing judges. The religious right gained a net 2 seats in the United States Senate. They went from 51-49 to 53-47. So if we look at the results of the election, the church-state separation movement lost because there is now an additional 2 U.S. senators to vote to confirm religious right-wing judges.
And of course, all those judges are coming out of the Federalist Society, right? Because
well,
Trump was
whether they're coming out of the Federalist Society or not,
he knows about that.
They are religious right-wingers. Now, initially, the Federalist Society was going to be an organization in which we would get economic conservatives but not religious right-wingers, because it was initially also showing a very strong libertarian streak. And if someone has a strong libertarian streak, like former Ninth Circuit Reagan appointee Judge Alex Kozinski, they're not going to favor big brother government being the enforcement mechanism, the police power of the state imposing religious dogma. But unfortunately, the religious right has gained all over. So I don't think it's so much a question of which specific branch of the right-wing religious right judges emerge from. It's a question of who they are, and once they get to the Senate, they seem to be exceptionally devoted to imposing their religion on everyone.
Eddie, would you not agree as much as we're talking about this rather severe and unfortunate problem, that it's a problem not just for atheists and for those who believe strongly in the freedom of religion, but it's very problematic for religious believers as well, because with so many religions contending for influence on the public stage, which one will be selected, or two or three, whatever?
Unfortunately, all religions will be all right. It's us non-believers who will be excluded from full constitutional protection, because the religious right justices on the court do believe that no branch of government can favor one religion over others. But they take the position that government can collectively favor all religions against non-belief.
I think that the conflict and the problem having to do with wrong believers as opposed to non-believers is that one thing that any believer hates worse than sin is a competing religion. And so the proliferation and the bringing out into the open of all of these various religious ideas will cause conflicts that may break out into all kinds of unpleasant side effects that have nothing to do with the U.S. Senate, sort of the law of unintended consequences.
It could be, but for our purposes, the Senate is only relevant because it's a conduit to getting these judges on the court. What we will see from Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Alito, Thomas, and Chief Roberts is the favoring of all religions against non-belief. Mm-hmm. And that is an extremely dangerous turn of events. We don't have to fear the Supreme Court saying that Christianity is the law of the land. What we have to fear is the Supreme Court saying by a 5-4 vote that all religions are favored over non-belief. It is the exclusion of atheism from being equal under the Constitution in terms of viewpoints on matters of religion that is the disaster that we're about to face with the new Supreme Court. Also, a 5-4 majority is bad enough. If at any time before the next presidential election, Ruth Bader Ginsburg leaves the court, the president will be able to appoint another justice, and there will be a 6-3 majority in favor of religious tyranny versus the equality of the non-believer. And this is very tragic. Now, when I last spoke to all of you in person in Clearwater in September of 13, and I forecasted the 2016 election and the dangers that might happen. In your state of Florida, we just had a disaster in the Senate election. A very fine U.S. senator who always opposed the religious right was defeated by someone who will vote to confirm every religious right-wing judge and nominee.
I was doing a little research on the Federalist Society, and I see that Trump has inherited 107 judicial vacancies, whereas Reagan inherited 35 and Obama 54. So that's an alarming number. Of course, he doesn't have the attention span to really properly evaluate these judges, so he's turning it over to the Federalist Society, where they will appoint these types of judges throughout the whole judiciary, the federal judiciary, and exacerbate the problem even more. It seems like we're going full circle. Women were second-class citizens when this country was founded because they couldn't vote until, I believe, 1922. And now that's going to be the burden of atheists as being second-class
But we don't know to what extent the Supreme Court will allow prejudicial legislation against non-believers. Justice Scalia wrote in 2005, but was still a dissent. What he wrote was, the First Amendment permits the disregard of the devout atheist. Now, we don't know if that's going to stop at just allowing religious displays on public property, or if it will mean that government can actually confer benefits on those who profess a belief that same government can withhold from the non-believer. This is really a tension where we don't want to have to find out, but we will. So we don't know how far this will go.
Some examples of what they might do?
Well, the Hobby Lobby decision would be a good example, right?
Now, Hobby Lobby, where I did an amicus brief for the Center for Inquiry, Hobby Lobby was a case where religious people who ran a secular business wanted special exemption from the Affordable Care Act's mandate that they provide insurance coverage for contraception. And the Supreme Court, in a split 5-4 decision, gave them that. Now, the danger is that we always say believers, but what they're doing is they're using the free exercise clause not just to shield the religious from having fewer rights. They want to they're using the free exercise clause to claim that the free exercise of religion gives only those who profess a religious belief special rights to avoid complying with generally applicable laws, so that no one else can avoid, they have a secular, non-religious business, can avoid providing insurance coverage for contraception to their employees, except those who have a religious objection. And for only the religious to be able to dodge compliance with otherwise universally applicable laws is simply using the free exercise clause to trump, pardon the pun, the establishment clause. And so this is the other danger, that this Supreme Court will not only say, we now reinterpret the establishment clause that government can favor all religions versus non-belief, but it will interpret the free exercise clause to say it gives only the religious special constitutional rights to avoid complying with laws that would result in the violation of their beliefs. So we don't know how far this would go. For instance, we don't know what the Supreme Court would do, what the 5 religious right-wing justices on the court would do if someone, a religious person, had a lunch counter where they serve the general public, and an atheist walks in, they recognize the atheist, and they say, my sincerely held religious beliefs means I can't do business with an atheist. I won't seat you, and I won't allow you to be served in my restaurant. Now, that harkens back to an era of 50, 60 years ago in America with another target, but we don't know whether this Supreme Court will say the religious objecting restaurant owner couldn't refuse to seat a member of another religion, but can refuse to seat an atheist because government can have laws that protect all religions, but all religions are to be favored over non-belief. So we don't know how far this will go. Now, if there is a change in the presidency in 2020, of which there's no guarantee. You know, I mean, people are acting as if Trump is a sure thing for defeat in 2020. The polls don't reflect that. But let's say that a pro-church state separation president assumes office. and by then Trump has replaced Ginsburg. Well, in order to get back church-state separation, that new president would have to be able to replace two of the religious right-wing justices. So this could go on for decades. We have had church-state separation articulated by the Supreme Court that no branch of government can favor one religion over others, no branch of government can favor all religions against non-believers. We've had that since 1947. If we lose it, it means we will have lost it. We will have had church-state separation for more than 70 years before we lost it. We don't know how long it'll be until we get it back. By the way, there is unfortunately a case in the pipeline that could do us in. Even I thought we had a couple more years. They may be coming for us now. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal rightfully upheld that a huge Latin cross on public property in Maryland was an Establishment Clause violation, a case brought by the American Human Association. Just a few weeks ago, the proponents of the cross asked the Supreme Court to take the case, and it did. That's not a good sign. The Supreme Court usually will not take a case where they agree with the lower court. So if they use this case to overturn church-state separation, then our loss comes sooner than we even thought. I mean, we thought we had a couple years. So we don't know whether they will just narrowly uphold the cross. Justice Scalia took the position, ridiculous as it is, that there's no Establishment Clause violation because the Latin cross is not a religious symbol. That's ridiculous. I mean, have you ever seen a Latin cross on a Jewish grave?
Well, that's comparable to saying that the motto "In God We Trust" is not a religious phrase, right? Or doesn't suggest a particular religion, so it doesn't violate it.
But we would rather have the court, under these very bad circumstances, say that than have the court say it is a religious symbol, but we allow it anyway.
Yeah. Jeez.
Well, Andy, what do you think is a possible remedy for this rather dire situation that you've painted? Is it legislative and therefore political? What sort of actions can citizens carry out, perhaps, to move the situation in a more progressive direction?
It's exactly what you just said. Unfortunately, we're going to have to give up the almost 80 years of thinking we can always go to the Supreme Court to remedy these problems. That's not going to happen. So unfortunately, with the 5-vote majority, the alternative is for us, and this is a massive undertaking, to elect, whether they're believers or non-believers, pro-church state separationists to state legislatures. Now, as we all know, the state legislatures are cauldrons, breeding grounds for the most extreme pro-religious viewpoints, worse than Congress.
You know, Eddie, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so this is really, unless we can stop the anti-church state separation position in all the state or most of the state legislatures, we really have a problem. So it's going to mean taking on the religious right members of state legislatures and trying to defeat them.
I don't want to sound too discouraging again, but when the New Deal came in, I think is when the crusade really began, and it's accelerated, and the religious right has joined it. But it took them 80 years, as you just said, to take over the legislatures and the courts to the extent that they have.
No, it took them 80 years to take over the Supreme Court. They've had the legislatures for a very long time.
Nevertheless, what makes you think it won't take us 80 years to flip that coin?
Well, I'm not saying it'll take that. I'm saying that we would have to have a president who will replace 2 of the 5 religious right-wing justices, and then cases have to percolate up where the new court majority back in our favor will be willing to reverse what will happen in the next few years and reinstate the law as it is now before the new 5-vote majority gets to change it.
But Eddie, don't you need more than a president? Because Obama was nominating Garland, right?
Yeah.
And McConnell would never hear it for a whole year. So can't the Senate find ways to stall these appointments like they've done before?
Yes, if there were a different majority in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
But the religious right-wing majority in the Senate to confirm these judges and to accelerate their confirmation was just increased by 2 votes this month.
Right.
Yeah, you see, so yes, I mean, if there's a shift in the Senate, absolutely. But the Senate went more strongly the other way this month. The Senate went 2 additional votes for the religious right.
Yeah.
Well, that's something
Well,
serious to think
here's
about.
what I'd like to ask you about. Even though abortion services are only 3% of Planned Parenthood's activities, they still seem to be the poster child for the whole institution of abortion in America. I contend that state legislatures are now going to start imposing inordinate and extraordinary regulations on these facilities to try to put them out of business, and that those regulations will be upheld by these courts, and even if they're taken all the way up to the Supreme Court, so that in maybe 2 years from now, Planned Parenthood simply won't be able to exist anymore.
That's a very realistic possibility. Also, there are now 5 votes to overturn Roe versus Wade. There are, because if you count, again, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Chief Roberts, Alito, Thomas, that's it. And once you do that, the states will open a floodgate.
Yes.
Will open a floodgate of anti-abortion laws. Now, we managed a 5-4 victory. I did an amicus brief again for CFI, along with our General Counsel, Nick Little, in the Texas case where the state imposed unnecessary medical restrictions under the subterfuge of trying to protect the woman.
Right.
And we
Right.
scientifically showed that medically these restrictions weren't necessary. But that was 5-4, which meant we had Kennedy. Kennedy has been replaced by his former law clerk, Kavanaugh, who is far more an opponent of abortion rights.
Clearly,
I mean, Kennedy saved Roe versus Wade in 1992. Now, another thing about Kavanaugh is he is on record in a case as wanting to limit the Environmental Protection Agency's regulation of chemicals that cause global warming.
Ay,
Yeah, it goes from bad to worse.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely, it was absolutely a case where he wrote that opinion. So he also is on record of not only wanting to give the religious special exemption from providing contraception for people.
wow.
He also wants to he also wants to allow the religious to not even have to notify the government that they're not going to provide contraception. So, because if they notify the government will step in and provide that coverage.
Okay.
So what he's saying is, if the religious believe that even notifying the government that they won't provide the coverage puts them in the line of fire of participating in a scheme where someone else will provide the coverage, the religious shouldn't even have to give notice.
So we could end up with a nation where the only place that these services are available are the blue states, California, the West Coast states, and the northeastern states, maybe Illinois or something.
And
now, which means the flyover
think,
states that need it the most won't be able to get it. Eddie, let me tell you something. We're at the halfway through the program. I hope you can stay with us for the whole hour.
Yeah.
And so we want to take a short break, tell our listeners about Atheists of Florida. When we come back, we'd like to let you tell our listeners about the Center for Inquiry, and then we'll continue here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. 441-3000 if you'd like to talk with our guest, Eddie Tabish from the Center for Inquiry. Eddie's out in Los Angeles today, where it's either burning or raining. I wonder why God didn't have enough sense to send the rainstorm over the town of Pleasure while it was burning. Oh, I'm sorry, it was Pleasantville. Anyway, Eddie, we're going to give our quote for the day and then ask you to tell us about the Center for Inquiry. Joe?
Yes, Ed, happily I have a quote right here in my hand. It's from Imam Hassan Sabri, and was delivered in a sermon in Florida recently, where he was kind enough to say, "An atheist is a worm in the body of Muslims, causing disease." Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say so. I think you ought to send us $2 the first chance you get for our Insult an Atheist Fund.
I know it was Paradise, but I was mocking the president who didn't know what it was.
Eminently mockable.
Pleasure is the stripper's name. Paradise is the club where she works. He gets them confused easily. All right.
Understandable.
So, Eddie, tell us about the Center for Inquiry and how our listeners might learn more about the organization, if you would.
Go to centerforinquiry.org, centerforinquiry.org. The Center for Inquiry, which now includes the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, is an organization that deals with both scientific skepticism and atheistic humanism. The position we take is the application of reason and evidence to the physical universe is seamless. It covers the claims of supernatural religion and covers the claims of the paranormal. This is all stemming from the notion that the universe is natural, not supernatural, and by naturalistic universe, what we mean is that the universe is a closed physical system with nothing beyond it. And so there are no invisible realms, or given what we know about the dependence of consciousness on the physical brain, there is no possibility of consciousness or intelligence existing without a physical brain with functional synapses and cortical neurons. And it's as atheist philosopher Paul Draper says, anytime something mental happens, something physical happens. There's always activity in the brain when there is a thought or a concept. So the dependence of consciousness on the physical brain makes a disembodied God very unlikely, and also makes unlikely human survival of bodily death.
Well, this will
And
make,
then we also are strong champions of the reality of global warming, and we are very strong critics of non-evidence-based medicine.
This would make Donald Trump not a contender for membership then. An actual brain is required. However, let me also point out that if anyone goes to the website, they could look up the Tampa Bay chapter too. If they were.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
They're almost as active as we are.
Now, I do want to say this, and that's that if Roe versus Wade is overturned, I think Florida will be a battleground state. The legislature and the new governor will try to ban abortion. But I think that in terms of the population of the state, it would be a very, very close call. I wouldn't be surprised if all the voters in Florida, notwithstanding the people they elect, it would come down to like 51% pro-choice, 49% anti-choice. But I think that Florida, unfortunately, as it's been, will be a laboratory for fighting out these types of issues. Even though Senator Nelson lost, it wasn't by that much. Now that makes his loss even more heartbreaking. This is going to be, for those of you in Florida, you might be the first successful grassroots effort to overcome an anti-choice legislature in somehow preserving abortion rights if Roe versus Wade is overturned.
The trouble is, if we do it through a constitutional amendment, we need 60% of the vote to do it.
70% of the people, I don't know about in Florida, but nationwide are pro-choice.
Yes, they are.
But we have the panhandle.
Yeah, you have the panhandle, but you also have the southern part of the state.
Yeah,
What's going to happen is secular people or religious people who believe in secular neutral government are going to have to come out of the woodwork. I mean, elections do matter. My major concern in every presidential election since 1980 has been the Supreme Court. And in 2004, I used to make poor John Kerry crazy, I would see him at various events in California, and I'd come running up to him. He goes, I know the three words of the Supreme Court. And then he began saying it. So we really, this was the 2016 election, was the election where the winner would remake the Supreme Court. And unfortunately, the winner did remake the Supreme Court already, not even having been in office 2 years. But certainly, I think that atheists in Florida have a tremendous challenge and a unique opportunity, because while the elected public officials are all religious right-wing, the people are not.
It's a strange situation for a democracy, however. Somehow we need to find ways to improve our democracy, though, so that it is more reflective of the actual disposition of our people.
You're right about that, but there's also something else, too. A constitutional democracy is not pure majority rule. In a constitutional democracy, non-believers should be equal before the law, even if 99% of the populace says no.
Yes.
In a constitutional democracy, we should be able to say things, write books, make movies that offend 99% of the people. Women should have a right of choice on abortion. The LGBTQ community should have equal rights, irrespective of popular majorities. It's as Justice Jackson said in the Jehovah's Witness flag salute case, West Virginia School District versus Barnett in the early 40s, that the constitutional freedoms do not depend on any vote and are not contingent on the outcome of any election. So in a constitutional democracy, as opposed to a pure democracy, there are areas of minority rights that are untouchable. And we have to preserve that, and we have to preserve, particularly in the First Amendment area, the majority does not rule. And if every, let's say that every resident of a city wanted a giant statue of Jesus in front of the courthouse on Christmas, that's still unconstitutional.
Exactly. Let me ask you something, Eddie. The appointment of Kavanaugh to the court, do you think that Trump's selection may have focused on appointing a judge who asserts that a president cannot be held to answer for civil crimes while he's in office? And
that may have been a factor.
Yeah, could even apply to retired presidents.
Yeah. However, all of the contenders were religious right-wingers. So it's not that the president chose from among the contenders, someone who may be less of a religious right-winger but is more supportive of presidential immunity. That's not what happened. What happened is that among a list of candidates, all of whom were equally opposed to church-state separation and equally in favor of allowing government favoritism for religion collectively, he picked the one who also had the clearest record on presidential immunity.
Right.
You know, Eddie, you mentioned earlier in talking about the idea that the new court would approve a situation where everyone who was a believer, whether they were a whirling dervish or whatever, had some sort of rights that did not apply to non-believers. And since the entire Christian religion is founded based on the idea that you should be punished forever for what amounts to a difference of opinion, a thought crime, since this is an acceptable idea in the Christian religion to punish people for what they think. And if we do have a legal system that comes to the conclusion that non-believers are absent the rights that believers are entitled to, do you suppose that what kind of horrors might this idea of punishing people for what they think, what kind of horrors might this unleash? I mean, this has the potential to be a tsunami.
Yes, but there's not going to be any disregarding of any religions. I mean, all religions will be favored equally.
Even the Muslims?
Yes. Now, here's what's interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
Wouldn't this give Trump the ability to slam the door in their face when they want to?
No, because the court wouldn't go along with that.
Yes, but they would go along with punishing people for not believing. That's my question.
That we don't. You see, that we don't know to what extent the non-believer can face discrimination. You know, so for instance, let's say that the Supreme Court says that all government can now favor religion collectively over non-belief. To what extent does that favoritism have a limit? Would it mean that atheists could be once again barred from testifying in court? I mean, we don't know how far that goes, or does it just mean that government can display religious articles on public property, government can speak in favor of belief, but can't actually subject the non-believer to deprivation of rights, but government will be now permitted and even required